I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in January of 1988 when I was 11 years old, which means that I've lived with type 1 diabetes for over 3 decades. And in my 31-year diabetes journey, there are 2 days that stand out. The first is the day I started insulin in January of 1988. And the second was in June of 2017, the day I started the 670G. I had no idea what a peaceful night of sleep was until I started the 670G. I didn't even know that I didn't know what a peaceful night of sleep was. I had no idea how amazing life with type 1 diabetes could be until I started the 670G. As a pediatric endocrinologist, I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with patients and their families over the course of the past 2 years since the MiniMed 670G has been available. And I've gotten to be a part of patients and their families succeeding with the 670G and having the burden of type 1 diabetes decreased. I'd like to tell you a story about one of my patients who started the 670G. The boy was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 6 years old. He was started on a VAO shortly after diagnosis. In September of 2017, when he was 10, he had 2 hypoglycemic seizures. His provider at the time started him on a Dexcom. I met the boy for the first time in January of 2018. When I met him, his hemoglobin A1C was 9.2%, and his time in range was 27%. But more importantly than that was the way that type 1 diabetes was affecting this family. The parents could no longer sleep through the night because of their fear about nocturnal hypoglycemia and seizures. They couldn't function at their jobs during the day. And the boy, well, he didn't get to do the things that he loved to do being a 10-year-old boy, ride bikes or play sports alone with his friends. And I said to the family, it certainly feels as though type 1 diabetes is winning right now, but we are going to turn the tables on that. I started him on a 670G, but it took me a while to convince the family to let go of control and let the system do its work, as well as to let go of the share feature. And when they did, it was an overwhelming success. The last time that I saw the boy, his parents were sleeping through the night. They could function at their jobs during the day. The boy got to go back to doing all of the things that he loved as a boy, playing with his friends, sports, riding his bike. His hemoglobin A1C was 7.3%. He spent 70% time in range, 1% low. And this is what inspires me to be here with you. To simplify the management of patients on the 670G so that you, your patients, and their families can experience the same success that I'm having and that my patients and their families are having. So let's get started. And here it is in 3 simple steps. A, B, C. A, SmartGuard auto mode. Adopt it, embrace it, maximize the amount of time your patients spend there. B, there are 2 key patient behaviors. The first is to bolus 15 minutes before eating. And the second is to calibrate on a schedule 3 times a day. And C, carb ratios. The most impactful thing that a clinician can do when managing patients on the 670G is to optimize the carb ratios, which nearly universally means strengthening them when a patient transitions from manual mode to auto mode. Let's take a look. As you can see here from the stair steps, the only way to achieve the maximum time in range of 72% is with the MiniMed 670G using SmartGuard auto mode. When you look at some of the other therapies, if a patient is using CGM plus multiple daily injections or CGM plus an insulin pump, these patients unfortunately are only achieving 51 to 55% time in range. And while CGM is extremely important, it's not until CGM is working with the insulin pump to automate the delivery of basal insulin dynamically with the MiniMed 670G and hybrid closed loop therapy to achieve the maximum time in range. Well, why is time in range important? I think we have to look at it from a patient perspective as well as from a clinician perspective. From a patient perspective, time in range is important because for those of us living with type 1 diabetes, we feel our best and perform our best at work and play when our glucose levels are in the normal range. Highs and lows feel miserable. And as a healthcare provider, not only do I want my patients to feel their best, in addition, we know that from a recent reanalysis of the DCCT data, that for every 10% drop in time in range, the risk of complications increases, which means that increasing time in range may correlate with a decreased risk of complications. Well, how is it that SmartGuard Auto Mode achieves these outcomes? Here we're taking a look at nearly 70,000 patients using the 670G, and we're comparing the time that they have auto mode on versus auto mode off. And what we can see is a large increase in their time in range when the patients are using SmartGuard Auto Mode and have it turned on. And it turns out that SmartGuard Auto Mode is most impactful on decreasing high glucose levels. We see here a 26% difference in glucose values over 10. At the same time, SmartGuard Auto Mode also protects against low glucose values with a 34% difference in glucose values less than 3.9. And when you add that up over the course of a year, your patient gets 38 days back in the target range with SmartGuard Auto Mode on. That's over a month of life that patients with type 1 diabetes get back with the flip of a switch. It's easy. It means that those of us living with type 1 diabetes can spend more time living our lives and less time worrying about managing type 1 diabetes. A, auto mode. Adopt it, embrace it, maximize the amount of time that patients spend in SmartGuard Auto Mode. SmartGuard Auto Mode has advanced protections from highs as well as lows. And it does this using the dynamic delivery of basal insulin. B, we want to encourage the right behaviors in our patients. And there are two key patient behaviors. The first is to bolus 15 minutes before eating. You can see here that this patient has a preprandial rise and he is not bolusing before he eats. What we want to do here is re-educate the patient about insulin action and encourage him to bolus 15 minutes before eating. The second key behavior is to calibrate the sensor 3 times a day on a schedule. The system only requires calibration every 12 hours after the first day. However, the accuracy is improved with 3 calibrations per day. Additionally, we want to make sure that the patient calibrates before bed so that he or she is not asked to calibrate overnight. If the patient adopts these behaviors, bolusing 15 minutes before eating and calibrating 3 times a day on a schedule, the patient will spend more time in auto mode. And C, carb ratios. The most impactful thing that you can do as a clinician is optimize carb ratios. And this nearly universally means strengthening or intensifying carb ratios when patients transition from manual mode to auto mode. To give you an example, when I was using standard pump therapy, my breakfast carb ratio was 8 and the rest of the day was 10. Now using SmartGuard Auto Mode, my breakfast carb ratio is 5 and the rest of the day is 7. If the patient is having consistent highs after meals, we strengthen or intensify the carb ratio by 10 to 20%, just what we've always done with standard pump therapy. On the flip side, if the patient is having lows consistently after a meal, we weaken the carb ratio by 10 to 20%. Let's take a look at a report that we might see when the patient is with us in the office, or perhaps we're taking a look in between visits. And we want to start with the assessment and progress report. Very often, we can get absolutely everything we need very quickly and easily with this one report. We're going to start with the statistics section. And the first thing that we want to take a look at is how much time is the patient spending in auto mode. Our goal is for the patient to spend over 80% of the time in auto mode. We also want to take a look at calibrations, make sure the patient is calibrating 3 times a day, and we want to take a look at sensor wear. Our goal is for the patient to be wearing the sensor 85% of the time or more to achieve a goal use of auto mode of over 80%. If the patient is not in auto mode over 80% of the time, it's often related to sensor wear or calibrations, and we want to work on these things. Next, we want to take a look at auto mode exits. As a patient, auto mode exits can be frustrating, and we want to decrease, if not completely eliminate auto mode exits. The 2 most common reasons for auto mode exits are 1, no calibration, and 2, high sensor glucose auto mode exit. These go back to the ABCs. No calibration, we recommend that they calibrate 3 times a day. High sensor glucose auto mode exit, we go back to the ABCs. Is the patient bolusing? Is the patient bolusing 15 minutes before he eats? Are the patient's carb ratios optimized? Next, we want to look at time and range. And here we see time frame A, which is the most recent 2 weeks, where the patient is using SmartGuard auto mode, and time frame B, where in this example, the patient is using manual mode. Our goal time and range is over 70%. We'd like to see less than 3%, between 3.1 and 3.8. We can see that this patient is achieving that goal, and we'd like to see less than 1% below 3. Overall, this patient is spending over 80% of the time in auto mode, which is leading her to over 70% time in range. She is not spending very much time low. When you look at how the system performs overnight, it's performing beautifully. And at this point, we might congratulate the patient on her success. However, we do see that the patient looks as though she still is having some high glucose levels happening after lunch, and we may want to intensify the carb ratio there. To sum up, keep it simple. Let the system do the work, and you and your patients can take all of the credit. A, SmartGuard auto mode. Adopt it, embrace it, maximize the amount of time your patient spends there. B, 2 key patient behaviors that we want to encourage. 1, bolus 15 minutes before eating, and 2, calibrate the sensor 3 times per day on a schedule. And C, carb ratios. The most impactful thing that we can do as clinicians is to optimize the carb ratios for our patients, which nearly universally means strengthening or intensifying them when transitioning into SmartGuard auto mode. Thank you.